Welcome to Hoops Royalty. I'm King Jemison alongside, as always, my man in Cleveland, Karna Venkatraj. And you know, Karna, for a couple sweet days, we escaped the chilly Midwest and ventured to the most beautiful land in the world, Memphis, Tennessee. As promised, we both finished our races at the St. Jude Memphis Marathon. It completely wrecked us both as I turn off the music. But we survived. It was such a fun weekend. And our love of Memphis has been renewed to a whole new level. Karna, before we get into what was actually a pretty good week for the Grizzlies, who won 2 consecutive games for the first time all season, mind blown. Tell me a little bit about your first tussle with the half marathon.
So I'm glad you brought this up. I did finish a half marathon with what could only be described as very little training. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. You know, I think I caught a little bit of a bug. I was looking at running shoes this morning. I'm like, am I a runner now? And then I quickly am like, no. I'm not going to spend that much money on running shoes. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to run through Memphis. I think St. Jude's. There are institutions in Memphis that mean a whole lot. Surprisingly, MLGW is not one of them. I would say St. Jude's is a huge part of Memphis, and Memphis is a huge part of St. Jude's, and that's exemplified by the marathon. It's a very emotional marathon for a lot of people, and it was just cool to be part of that. Dude, shout out. King's not a guy who's going to brag about himself, so I'm going to do it for King. Shout out King, man. Some are saying, as of right now, he's qualified for the Boston Marathon. The guy finished 16th overall, which I looked up because I was curious. The guy is a freaking superstar, man. He's, number 16 to St. Jude's Marathon, number 1 in your hearts. The guy's a freak athlete. Don't let him tell you anything differently. So really proud of your performance, man. It was awesome to see.
Dude, you are too kind, but you were so right about the marathon. It's a really cool event. They changed the course this year, and if anybody listening had anything to do with that, I think it was a super positive change, and we'll give that feedback in whatever surveys they send out, because I spent last year the vast majority of the race out on Parkway and beautiful neighborhoods, but it's quiet over there. It's hard to feel the energy, the love that Memphis is known for. This year, it was a much more downtown-centric course, more time spent on St. Jude's campus, and that's what really makes it special. So it was a really, really cool weekend for us both. And Karna, you actually got to see a Grizzlies win, which we'll talk about here in a bit. Unfortunately, I was not there yet, but one more non-basketball question. Sure. Okay, as y'all know, Karna is our resident Texas Longhorns fan. Karna, did you have any fear on Sunday morning that your Longhorns would be left out of the playoff?
No.
And then, follow up. Do you think the committee made the right decision with who they went with, number 4, Bama over Florida State?
No. You can't have – you have Jordan Travis tweeting that, I wish I broke my leg soon. No, that was bad. It's a bad look. I understand why you need the SEC, but it's just – it was inconceivable that they made that decision. I think it's the wrong decision, not just because it hurts UT's chances. I think Alabama is the best team, but that's not – I mean, you can't lay out all these rules and all these precedent and then say because a player broke his leg that team is no longer deserving. It was ugly business. It's just ugly business. I think the CFP got it wrong. I think their calculus was this: we're going to make a really controversial decision, but we're only going to have to live with it for 1 year because the 12-team playoff is coming next year. And that's a really, really crappy calculus, in my opinion. It was unfair. It was unfounded. That being said, it's also I see the other side of it. I don't think it was like Alabama's clearly a better team. So we'll see.
But what about Texas? Sorry, I interrupted you when you were about to answer that. Were you afraid that maybe Texas would be the one left out?
No way. No. I didn't think it was going to be Texas. As soon as Texas, as soon as they there was rumors that Bama was going to get in. You just if they ignore the head-to-head, that's equally, in my opinion, as bad as letting Florida State leaving out of Florida State out of the playoffs. I mean, overall, it was fine. Whatever. We have to beat a good team to win a national championship. It's just how we have to beat two good teams to win the national championship. So just that we're always going to be in that position if we're in the playoffs.
Yeah, I hate the decision. I believe Florida State should have gotten in. However, it's going to lead to two really good games.
Yeah.
The four teams that you got in, the specific matchups, and I don't think UW's going to be a pushover for Texas.
I don't think there's a runaway favorite either. Like
No.
I think Alabama has flaws. Like we saw it in the. This is not a football podcast, but we saw it in the last two games. They do have pretty big flaws, and Milroe in big moments has performed really well, but also really bad in some big moments. I think people saw that prayer to Isaiah Bond, and they're like, "Wow, like this guy's a big time performer." I don't know. He wasn't a big time performer against Texas, so.
No, he was not. Almost got benched in that game. Or did he get benched? It was certainly on the table.
Yeah.
Got benched the game afterwards. But now on to the admittedly shorter Grizzlies portion of the podcast today. We'll give our royal decrees, of course. In mine, you will hear about my favorite cult hero on this Grizzlies roster. Then it's on to News of the Realm, where we'll discuss the latest Grizzlies week of action. And then finally, in the King's Court, we're going to debate the Grizzlies' impending roster crunch with Bismack, Biyombo, and Jaylen Nowell, among others. Grizzlies have to decide who they're going to keep, who they're going to let go. So let's get right into it. Karna, just a moment. I'm going to ask for your royal decree, but first, let's get that gavel of justice.
My royal decree is this. Taylor Jenkins needs to set aside the tactics for a second and start leading the team. And when I say leading the team, show some fire outside of foul calls, outside of protecting Jaren. Show some fire, show some leadership, call out players in the locker room. And right, we're not insiders, so we don't get to see that. But from every indication that we've seen since Taylor Jenkins has started his tenure at the Grizzlies, is that he's a much more tactical coach than he is a motivational coach. What we've seen from the greatest coaches of this generation, right? I'll put Spo in there. I'll put Popovich in there. I'll put Phil Jackson in there. I mean, there are plenty of others, but those guys had a distinct voice and a distinct motivational tactic. I think the beginning of the season shows us that Taylor Jenkins needs to start implementing that. It's okay to be a player's coach. It's great. But you can't lack accountability in the locker room. And when Marcus Smart is getting calls for 2023, 2024 Coach of the Year, that means that there's a failure of our actual coaching staff to step in and be that voice. And that is what we pay Taylor Jenkins for, just as much as what we pay him for as far as making the right moves, which he hasn't this season in some respects. So that's my royal decree. He needs to be a motivator just as much as he is a tactician.
I'm not at all on the fire Taylor Jenkins Twitter bandwagon. However, this is a spot-on royal decree because it is clear the improvements the Grizzlies made in the past 3 games came after Marcus Smart's rant, not what Taylor Jenkins was saying. And we do see this with coaches at all levels, but particularly in professional sports. At some point, the message seems to fall on deaf ears. And Taylor Jenkins, during his time leading the Grizzlies, has consistently produced a top 10 defense, top 5 defense even. And he's also led a team that plays with incredible pace, generates turnovers, in general, finds easy buckets that kind of sustain and make up for structural problems in the half-court offense. We haven't been seeing those things as much this year, although the defense is improving. And it makes you wonder, has his message grown stale? Are the players not really tuned into him in the same way? And I think one way he can fix that is showing a little bit more fire, as you said, not just at the officials, but at his own team. I think if he does that, this team is going to have a chance to really be good defensively because we've already started to see those improvements. And defense, as we know, is much more determined by effort than offense.
Yep, and I'm with you there. And I think, he was able to pull the right levers in certain moments during this last stretch, and I love to see that. What I want to see more too is it shouldn't have been Marcus Smart the only one in that locker room. And again, we don't have. I'm going to caveat this by saying we're not in the locker room with Taylor Jenkins, so we don't know. But from every indication, he's a player's coach, and at certain times during the season, you need to be a motivator, and if you can still have that title as player coach. You just need to be able to have that relationship with your young players and even your stars to say, hey, it's not getting it done. This is what you need to get it done. And if you don't, we have a problem. And I think that level of respect needs to be cultivated in the locker room. What people who maybe don't have like a growth mindset or a mindset that's like geared towards improving,
Couldn't be us as former
yeah,
teachers.
will
Live with
say
that growth mindset.
will say, oh, it's too far gone. Taylor Jenkins can't do it. It's something that can be learned and added to a coaching bag or whatever you want to call it. So I'm not out on Taylor Jenkins. I'm not saying we should fire him. I don't think there is a hot seat as of right now. Just that needs to be the push for him is you're a great tactician or you're marketed as a great tactician. What can you do more to motivate your players?
Stamp it. And now my rule decree is going to have to, it builds off a decision that Taylor Jenkins already made and suggests one that he should be making in the coming week. So let's hear it. Vince Williams Jr. should start. He has the best net rating on the Grizzlies by almost 9 points. He's at plus 10.5. The next closest is Kenny Lofton at plus 1.7. In 6 of the 8 games where Vince has played at least 10 minutes, he's had a positive plus minus. The Grizzlies are 2-6 in those games, so that begs the question of what could have happened if Vince had been out there for longer. Vince's per 36 averages are 12.2 points, 8.6 rebounds, 2.4 stocks, and over 2 3-pointers per game. Exactly what you want from that starting wing spot. He had an incredible breakout game against Dallas, going for 15 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, and 2 blocks. And what was probably the best performance of the season for the Grizzlies, certainly defensively, it was their best game. He's a more effective player right now than David Roddy, Zaire Williams, John Concher, or any other wing the Grizzlies could reasonably start next to Desmond Bane and Derrick Rose. His defensive and rebounding prowess will be most helpful playing alongside the team's starters because he can be a glue guy and defend the other team's best player. He's played at least 20 minutes in each of the last 3 games, so it's clear he's in the rotation. But Vince Williams Jr. is one of your 5 best players currently available, so it's time to move him in to the starting lineup.
This is my only argument. Right now, he plays a 6-man role, right? He's in the rotation. He plays a backup role, right? And I agree with you. I saw it live during the Jazz game. And there are things that are not being captured by analytics or by stats here of what he contributes to this team. He has an energy. He's making some things that don't get recorded as steals, like deflections, stuff like that, are happening because he is so high energy. And he's a disruptor. That's the biggest thing. On defense, he's disrupting the rhythm of the opposing team. My argument here is there are some players, and we've seen them more recently, people like Lou Williams, Jamal Crawford, who did their best work as off the bench players, largely because, one, they had chemistry with some of those backup players, and they were interchangeable. They were portable, right? Do you think if we give the starting role to Vince Williams, that the system that the starters demand, right? And I guess we need to do more research on the floor percentage with Desmond Bane and Jaren Jackson Jr. and some of our star players. What do you think that changes anything, or do you think that he's so portable he'll fit into any system?
First of all, I believe he is an extremely portable player because of what I described. I mean, he offensively is going to shoot open threes and crash the glass. He's not going to handle the ball very much. He's not going to. He's a decent passer, a willing passer, but he's not going to create off the dribble. So he fits better alongside established creators offensively, alongside better players on offense. Shocker. Everybody looks better playing with the starters, but the main reason why he needs to start is defense. He might be the best perimeter defender on the team right now, at least while Marcus Smart is injured. And so that strength is most accented if you let him defend the other team's best player. To do that, he needs to be in the starting lineup. So because his skill set fits with the starters offensively, and it's going to be the best chance for him to showcase what he can do defensively with his 7-foot wingspan, even though he's just 6'4", I think it's time to give him that nod over David Roddy. And another note, he played some great defense this weekend, really locked up Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving had one of his worst games of the season, and Vince was the primary defender.
Yeah, I agree with you. The only thing that I think will be interesting to see is he is not a creating off the ball. Desmond Bane, historically, until very recently, has had trouble creating for himself. Jaren Jackson Jr., we know, has problems creating for himself based off of his on-floor, off-floor with John Morant, off-floor, on-floor with a true point guard. I'm worried that 3 non-creating players will force Derrick Rose to be our primary creator, and that is a scary proposition. Something to think about and see if Vince Williams as they go forward.
Although something that Derrick Rose has done very well in the past 2 games he's played, where he's
true.
been.
That is honestly scarier to me because I get a little scared when there's like a lack of consistency, because what happens is then the coaching staff's like, oh, our problems are fixed, because we're creatures of recency bias, right? So that is a little concerning, but we are still in the figure it out mode. We are 6 games away from John Morant. Let Vince Williams get these 6 games and see what we have. I agree with you. Stamped.
He is a perfect connector, and I think when you're trying to evaluate young talent, you have to give them that chance to be alongside other bench guys who they might play with more in practice, who he's had more familiarity with in the hustle. And then you also need to see how they fit with your best guys. So far, that's been really good for Vince Williams. I mean, he's been good in whatever scenario. That net rating shows it. But to know whether he's really going to be a piece you want to move forward with, and that's something you have to determine since he's on a 2-way contract and only has a limited number of games he can play, you got to see what he can do in that starting lineup. But I appreciate you stamping it. I stamped yours as well. And now let's get on to news of the realm, where we're going to talk a little bit about this week of Grizzlies action. So the Grizzlies played 3 games last week. Karna was at the first, a 105-91 triumph over the Jazz that broke the Grizzlies' horrible winless start to the season at home. Karna, before we go any further, what was the energy in the building like last Wednesday night?
I mean, Grant, it wasn't a playoff game. It wasn't as big as some of the other Grizzlies games I've been to. But look, it's early in the season. We have not been good. For it, all things considered, it was pretty high. And I think everyone was just celebrating a home win. Everyone really was in a good mood. I wouldn't say it was like the roof was about to come off the place, but it was good. And the rendezvous nachos were great. So
those always slap. Man, what a fantastic in-arena food option that perfectly matches the city. But then the Grizzlies went back on the road. They beat the Mavs 108-94 on Friday in what I described as probably the best performance of the season. And then they fell to the Suns 116-109 on the second night of a back-to-back, again on the road. Desmond Bane scored 30 against Dallas and 27 against Phoenix. He looks fully healthy again. Jaren Jackson Jr. played just 13 minutes with foul trouble against Dallas, although he never fouled out. And then he came back well-rested, dropped 37 against Phoenix. Maybe his offensive struggles are finally turning around. The Grizzlies won the first half in all 3 games, emphatically storming to the lead against Utah and Dallas. They had double-digit halftime leads in both of those games. But, Karna, any lingering thoughts on this past week of Grizzlies basketball that I think inarguably was the best week of the season so far?
Okay, there are 2 things. One positive thing, one negative thing. So I will start with the positive thing. We looked the best from end to end. Chemistry-wise, there was consistent scoring throughout. Desmond Bane looked great. Jaren Jackson Jr. through this 3-game stretch looked like he scored 37 points. It wasn't a winning effort, but it was good to see Jaren Jackson Jr. produce on that sort of level. We looked the best. We looked improved. Here's a negative thing. Those 2 games against the Jazz and the Mavericks have taken, or I'll say this. There was 2 key pieces missing against that our opponents were missing. The Jazz were missing Lauri Markkanen, who cooked us earlier in the season. Yeah. And noted Grizzly killer Luka Doncic was celebrating his first child's birth.
Congrats, Luka, by the way.
Congrats. I know you're an avid listener.
Of course.
But look, there's still a bunch of positives. The emergence of Vince Williams, Jaren Jackson Jr. producing, Desmond Bane being creator, Derrick Rose improving and figuring out how to play with this team. A lot of things to take away that are great. Let's all we are an uphill battle in the West. We played two teams that are missing key components. Let's take a step back, not put too much pressure on the team, and expect this to be the new normal until Ja comes back. We're not going to win all 6 games. Just let's pump the brakes a little bit. So, one positive, one negative. The season hasn't all the way turned around, is what I'll say.
No.
Yeah.
That's really good context to add. I neglected to say it in my quick recaps of the 2 games, but what I'm about to say about the Grizzlies defense, you need to know what Karna just said about who those teams were missing to put it in appropriate context. But I'm going to say it anyway. Since Marcus Smart's rant, the Grizzlies have the number 1 defense in basketball. And thus begins the Marcus Smart 2023-2024 NBA Coach of the Year campaign. But seriously, the Grizzlies look so much better defensively in the past week. Obviously, they held the Markkanen-less Jazz and the Luka-less Mavs under 100 in each of those 2 games. And then, the Suns didn't exactly go off. 116 points for a team with Kevin Durant and Devin Booker is not exactly something to be scoffed at. They're playing with a lot more energy, and that's leading to easy transition buckets. That was a huge focus in the Jazz game. And in the Mavs game, what most impressed me was the Grizzlies got back to their offensive rebounding ways, led by Vince Williams. And those offensive rebounds, the volume wasn't incredible, but the timing was. And what I mean by that is every time the Mavs went on a run, even if the Grizzlies missed their next shot down the floor, felt like they got that rebound, extended the possession, and usually were able to score in that second chance opportunity. That's what the Grizzlies need to do to just keep fighting. They are one of the worst offenses in the league, still worst in 3-point percentage. But if you can effort your way to some easy looks with getting out in transition and second chance points, they may be able to stay afloat for these next few games.
Look, all that's to be said is earlier in the season, even without Laurie and without Luka, there's a good chance we could have lost to these teams based off how we look. Then now they became easier wins. So that's improvement right there. In a vacuum, that's improvement. Doesn't matter who's on the floor. Beating bad NBA teams earlier in the season was a struggle. Now it seems to be less of a struggle. So that is a drastic improvement and should be a positive outlook for our Grizzlies fan base.
Yeah, excellent point. Well, let's head to the Royal Court, shall we? So in today's Royal Court, where of course we debate hot topics for the Grizzlies and NBA, we're going to talk a little bit about some decisions the front office must make. And I don't hold it against you if you have no confidence in the decisions the front office is making, because this year they've been pretty unequivocally bad. But the Grizzlies just signed Jaylen Nowell to a second 10-day contract, as Marcus Smart and Luke Kennard look like they're going to continue to be out, probably up until about when Ja returns on December 19th. We know that Luke Kennard just got an update saying he's going to be out 2 to 3 more weeks, but it was a return to play in 2 to 3 more weeks update, which is a positive. By that date, December 19th, the Grizzlies also have to decide if they're willing to cut somebody else to keep Bismack Biyombo. And in 10 days, of course, they're going to have to figure out what to do with Jaylen Nowell. If they want to continue keeping him, they may have to cut somebody to open up room there as well. So, Karna, what are your thoughts on this impending Grizzlies roster crunch? Should they try to keep Biyombo, Nowell, both, neither? And who should they cut to make that room?
I think unequivocally it makes sense that they keep those 2 guys. I think we both can probably agree on that. I think where we're going to disagree is what they should do to keep those guys. So right off the top, King, what do you think about keeping those 2 guys?
So you have to keep Bismack Biyombo. If only for the front court depth he provides. His incredible start to a Grizzlies tenure has kind of slowed down a little bit, but he's still been very good, very impactful. And unfortunately, that means you have to cut Kenny Lofton. And if Kenny couldn't break into the rotation with as battered and bruised as the front court is right now for the Grizzlies, kind of shows what the coaching staff thinks about him. And I think it comes back to his lack of defense and the fact that he's kind of a microwave scorer, but does he necessarily fit alongside other really good NBA players? Or is he more of a G League monster? And so I'm afraid that he is going to get the axe, and he has been a fan favorite, understandably so. I hope he lands on his feet in the NBA, but Bismack Biyombo is a much more important member of the Grizzlies right now. And then
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say they need to keep both. What I'm going to suggest is these rumors about other teams being interested in John Conchar. Let's take advantage of that and let's trade the man. One trade that works with the money because this team has an exception to be able to bring him in. Trade John Conchar to the Warriors for 2 second-round picks. And then you can keep both Kenny Lofton and Jaylen Nowell. And I'll explain why I want to do that in a second. But what do you think about that in a vacuum? Flipping Kenny Lofton and Conchar for Nowell and Biyombo.
I mean, look, I think that makes sense from a depth perspective, but from a cutting the worst guy on that is on the that's on your team right now, it's Laravia, right? But like I said before, front offices are hesitant to do that with a guy that they've spent like a lot of draft capital on. But Laravia has been far and away the worst and least versatile player of the young guys.
Facts.
So to me, it makes most sense to cut him, get rid of him. Let's stop even wasting coaching. He's not an NBA player right now. He's not an NBA player. Maybe he goes overseas and comes back an NBA player, or goes to G League and comes back an NBA player. But right now, he's not an NBA player. I think Kenny Lofton Jr. has the ability to become an NBA player if he does a couple of different things. One of which is becoming a more consistent scorer, and two, becoming a better defender. Is that going to happen anytime soon? I'm not sure. But I think the potential of Kenny Lofton Jr. is higher than the potential of Laravia. He is covered by a couple of guys, right? He's covered by Bismack Biyombo. The question is, do you trust Bismack Biyombo to last the whole season from a injury perspective? He's going to be playing a lot of minutes, probably more minutes than he's played in his career. He's going to be a vital part of this team going forward. I do like having big man depth because we see what happens with the Grizzlies when we don't have big man depth. So, all that's to say, I do agree with your trade. The guy that we can trade that we're going to get the highest return for is John Conchar. Absolutely. Because he is a versatile player, a role player that a lot of teams that are looking to make a championship run, I hope we get him out of the West because you just know he's going to drop like 30 on us like one year.
John Conchar?
Dude,
that's physically impossible. He could not. He won't take enough shots to do that.
But also basketball gods? Question mark.
Fair.
Yeah. So like, all that's to say is I would love to see John Conchar in a Grizzlies jersey at the end of the season, but he's a guy that we can get the most for. So I agree with that. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think there's a case to cut Laravia over Lofton Jr. is also what I would contend.
I'd certainly prefer Lofton to Laravia as a player right now.
Yeah.
The problem is Lofton is on an expiring deal, whereas Laravia is on a multi-year deal. And so they're not likely to want to keep that dead cap space. They already have some with Kennedy Chandler, who they cut despite being on a multi-year deal. So while it wouldn't be unprecedented, I think they're just going to make the easier choice and cut Kenny because his contract's going to be up at the end of this season. But the contract, it's the same deal as Kenny. If he can't crack the rotation in this injury-riddled season, it's clear the coaching staff has no faith in him. Meanwhile, Nowell, he can create for himself and others. He's worth having around because that's a bigger need for the Grizzlies right now. He is just a competent NBA guard. Conchar is a rebounding glue guy, but he's not a great defender. Meanwhile, Vince Williams, they can replace him with because he's a rebounding glue guy who is seemingly a really good defender. The Grizzlies need a bench spark plug, and Nowell could be it. He's been in the positive plus-minus 3 of the past 4 games. He had 19 big points against Dallas, often creating dribble pull-ups in the mid-range. He's just a legitimate NBA guard, something the Grizzlies have in short supply. And the rest of this year can be a tryout for whether you want to try and re-sign him next year. Meanwhile, next year, Conchar starts making $6 million a year. If you're trying to save money, trading him for picks which you kind of need. You need to replenish your second round pick coffers. Makes a whole lot of sense. You're not losing somebody that you're even willing to play anyway.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think the trade makes a lot of sense. Um, and you're able to get some draft capital back. Maybe you're able to get some prospects back too. I don't know. I'm okay with trade. I would love draft capital. I think that would be ideal. I think what's worrying is for the NBA, the deal needs to be made soon. As we get closer and closer to our roster crunch, the value of what we're able to get back goes further down.
Yeah.
So again,
Fact.
this is another thing that goes back to the timeliness of decisions, right? I made an argument last week that the decision needs to be made on tanking, right? And it seems like sure, or maybe we're not. But this is what I mean is that the strategy for tanking is very much coaching decisions and front office decisions. So are you making a front office decision in a win now mode or a win later mode? And I think the contract decision will give us a lot of information about how our front office values our chances this year in the West.
Yeah. And trading him doesn't necessarily constitute a tank because you're not really playing him. But keeping Nowell might actually signify that the Grizzlies are trying to go for it because he's been an impactful player since he joined and fills a need that was glaringly evident before he arrived. Yeah. But Karna, that's going to be it for Hoops Royalty, bringing you royal hoops takes on the Memphis Grizzlies, NBA, and sometimes whatever else we want to talk about, be it marathons or Texas football. Please like and subscribe on YouTube, 5-star reviews, and nice comments wherever you listen to this podcast. Really helps us grow the show, and we need to grow the show to spread these royal decrees far and wide. I mean, what's a royal decree if it's not given out to the people? But thank you, as always, for listening, and go Grizz.